Hello and welcome to Tour Obscure, and today we are in the north side of Sheffield, more specifically Wardsend Cemetery. Now you might have heard about this place, but just behind me are 29,000 graves which have kind of been lost to time, and there's so much more history about this place. So today we're going to be looking at some riots what occurred here in the 1800s, a bridge what got swept away during some floods, and so much more. So join me to find out all about this place.
Located over 5.5 acres on a steep hillside, Wardsend Cemetery was opened in 1857, complete with its own chapel and picturesque views over Sheffield. But by 1977, Wardsend Cemetery was full. The chapel was long gone, and the views over Sheffield have now been mostly blocked by the dense trees and vegetation. Today, it sits quietly, nestled at the bottom of a road named after its founder, and 29,000 souls still rest here.
So as we enter the site now, it will become apparent just how many graves are here, and this is just in the entranceway. But the first thing we come to, just to our right hand side over here, is the site of the former chapel, what once stood here and held many of the services for the people what buried here. Now you might be able to see, but the rough shape of the chapel, or the footprint, is still partially visible. And we'll get to that in a minute why. But if you look at this picture here on this information board, you'll be able to see what the chapel looked like in 1863. And the reason you can see a rough outline of where this chapel once stood is because some excavation work took place here in 2014, and it actually revealed some very interesting things, as you can see on these photos here. So where we stood right now would have been looking directly down the centre of the old chapel and walking down the aisle. And if you take a quick look on there, that looks to me very similar to the photos what we just saw on the information board. And that's some of the items what were found during the excavation. So the chapel obviously is no longer here. And the reason why is unfortunately all too familiar in what we see as reasons given when historical buildings are demolished. So in 1954, an application to demolish the chapel was put in, and it was authorised. The reason given is because it was of no architectural or historical importance. I'll let you make your mind up on that one. But the chapel was demolished in 1954, and the area was just left to be taken over by nature until it was excavated and cleared in 2014. So we'll now exit the chapel down these Quite steep stairs, to be fair. So the story of Wardsend Cemetery actually starts around 1.5 miles down the road. If you're familiar with Sheffield, right at the bottom of Infirmary Road, just near where the Tesco is and the old infirmary hospital, there's a patch of land right in the middle of the carriageways where Penistone Road and Infirmary Road fork off from each other. Now that patch of land was once the St Philip's Church. It was built in 1818. But by 1957, the churchyard had become full and they needed to expand, but there wasn't anywhere to expand. So the priest at the time, or the vicar at St Philip's, he actually purchased this plot of land at Wardsend. His name was John Livesey, and he purchased this land out of his own pocket, reportedly. And so Wardsend Cemetery was born. In 1857, the cemetery opened and the first burial took place here. It was 2 years old, Anne Marie Marsden. And as with tradition back then, whether it's still a tradition today, I'm not sure. We don't see that many brand new graveyards opening up. But the tradition back then was the first person buried in a cemetery was known as the guardian of the cemetery. So 2-year-old Anne Marie Marsden was listed as the guardian of Wardsend Cemetery. So we've come past the chapel now, and carrying on, you might be able to see in some of these photos there's a small house or cottage in the vicinity of the church. Now this would have been the sexton's house. Now if you're not familiar with the term, a sexton was someone who looked after church buildings or church grounds, i.e. cemeteries. And that was the sexton's house just here, so the person who lived there would have been responsible for the upkeep of the cemetery. And it would have been around here somewhere. So I'm hoping that there might be something left. We've not seen a grave on this particular section. And then just two sat on their own in the bushes. Whether there was more and they've fallen down or had to be removed for safety reasons. And there looks to be a little bit of structure there hiding away. So this potentially could be remains of the sexton's house. And with a wall at that angle, I would maybe hazard a guess, but that was part of some steps, what maybe led up to the house. So I mentioned some riots at the Wardsend Cemetery, and you're probably thinking, riots at a cemetery? I know. But stick with me, because it will make perfect sense. So, the original pairing was John Livesey, who owned and opened the Wardsend Cemetery, and he employed a man named Isaac Howard, who was the sexton, and he lived in the house, what we've just been looking at. When Isaac Howard moved out of the property, another man was employed to look after the church grounds, or the burial grounds. And upon moving into the house, he noticed some quite strange things, and he made some very, very bold claims.
In 1862, Robert Dixon noticed unusual smells coming from the stable area of the sexton's house. Upon further inspection, he reportedly found evidence that freshly buried bodies were being dug up and brought to the house. Dixon claimed that some bodies had legs missing and that a majority were of small children. His suspicion was that Isaac Howard and John Livesey had been selling the bodies to medical schools for scientific research and dissection. Dixon reported the issue to the police, and 6 days later, word had spread of the possible crimes taking place at Wardsend. On the 3rd of June, 1862, a large number of people arrived at Wardsend Cemetery and forced their way into the sexton's house to see for themselves if the rumours were true. What they found only confirmed their fears, and the mob wanted revenge. The mob travelled half a mile to Isaac Howard's new house, but by the time they arrived, Howard had already fled. His house was set ablaze and completely destroyed. Ultimately, Howard and Livesey stood trial in York the very next month. Livesey was found guilty of making false burial entries and sentenced to 3 weeks in prison, whilst Isaac Howard, once the very proud sexton of Wardsend Cemetery, was found guilty of disinterring bodies and sentenced to 3 months in prison.
I'll continue our journey through the cemetery now, up this very steep bit of banking. And you may be able to see a fence up there. Just remember that fence, because what's on the other side of that makes this place quite unique. I'll explain when we get up there. So I mentioned that there's something at the other side of this fence which makes this place very unique. And we've also got a bridge here as well. So I'll first show you what's on the other side. It's a railway. Oh, big wow, it's a railway. Why is that so impressive? Well, let me tell you. Because when this place expanded in 1901, there was already 20,000 people buried behind me in the first section. So they had to expand beyond the railway. And that made it the only cemetery in the UK with an active railway line passing through it. Now, there is some counterclaims to say about this too. I believe it's relating to a cemetery in Surrey, which does have a railway line running through it, but I don't believe it's active. So this is the only one with an active railway line running through it. And when I say active, I use that term very loosely, because the last time I checked, this railway line, there's no passenger services on it anymore. It's one train, freight train, I believe, a day to Stocksbridge Steelworks. And as we've all seen in the news, with how steelworks are going at the moment, well, it might lose its status as having an active railway line passing through it. So over the bridge now. The railway is just there. And as you can probably see, with the very hot, dry summer we've had, unfortunately we've had a wildfire. And you can still smell it, that charred wood smell. So must be pretty fresh this, I would assume, in last week or so, maybe. Wow, that's it's done some damage. The graves continue down this way. Those graves there have unfortunately been damaged by this fire, you can see. It's quite sad. It's really strange, because the fire's obviously travelled up the hill, and then the grass where the footpath is just seems to be untouched, and then it's caught fire again further up there. You can see the extent or how far that travels up. There's plenty of graves up there, I don't know if you can see them, what have been toppled. So I have been here before but I've never fully explored it. But let me tell you, it's absolutely massive. And once you finish walking around here, you'll be in no doubt, but there is 29,000 graves here. So what happened to Wardsend Cemetery? Why is it like this? Well, the last burial was in 1977 and it was officially closed 11 years later in 1988. And after then, it was just left. And obviously, nature does its thing. There was no upkeep until, I believe, the Friends of Wardsend Cemetery came about. So you'll see many articles, videos, pictures, whatever else, and they'll all title Wardsend Cemetery as abandoned. And yeah, it looks it. However, officially it's not abandoned. It has been in the past, absolutely. But at this moment in time, it is looked after by the Friends of Wardsend Cemetery. They do a great job from what I can see. The information boards, I'm assuming, will have been put up by them. So if you have donated in the past to the page, your name's here. Thank you very much appreciated. If you want to get your name on there, press the super thanks button, leave a donation, and you'll get your name on the next video. So we're just about done with the cemetery now. So we're going to make us way back down to the bottom end where the entrance is, because I've got a bit of a bonus fact for you. So we're going to go down and have a look at that. I said I got a bonus fact for you. As we exit the cemetery, we come to this bridge, which you'll notice is quite new. And that's because it is. It were opened in 2009. And the reason for that is because the original bridge what stood here was washed away during the floods in 2007. The amount of water and the sheer force just simply brushed it away, and it left the scene of devastation. And there was no access by car to Wardsend Cemetery. So I believe we can get down and we might be able to see some of the original parts of this bridge. Now you'll be able to see right in the middle of the river there, there's some huge stonework, which is obviously at some point been laid together. You can see the where they've been joined up. So that's the remains of the old bridge, which was swept away during the floods. I can't actually see the original abutments. I'm going to assume that these were removed when the new bridge was constructed. There's nothing left of that, but that big chunk right in the middle of the river is all what remains of the original Wardsend Bridge, or sometimes locally known as the Club Mill Bridge. And these here are potentially parts of that bridge, but it's difficult to tell. But that definitely is. So that is all from Wardsend Cemetery. Press the like button, subscribe button, all that good stuff. And if you're feeling extra generous, you can press the super thanks button, which will get your name on the next video. So until next time, I'll see you later.